Hi everyone, welcome to this session where we will decode the Union Budget 2023 in a very simple manner. This video will be extremely useful for students, particularly those who are preparing for interviews and also for competitive exams. Before we discuss the budget, let us look at the state of the Indian economy. Now we know that the Indian economy is the fifth largest in the world after USA, China, Japan, Germany, and then we are fifth. And the total GDP, the economy is valued in terms of GDP, where GDP is nothing but the gross domestic product, which is the value of all the goods and services produced in the country during a given year. So the GDP of India is about 260 lakh crores, which in dollar terms is 3.18 or let us say $3.2 trillion. Now, if we look at the growth of the economy over the years, starting with the pre-COVID year 2019-20, then we had a growth of only 3.7%, which was primarily due to the post-demonetization effect. And then COVID hit us very badly, wherein we went into a negative minus 6.6. The whole world was reeling. And then during 21-22, we came back into a recovery phase, but then let us not get too carried away with this 8.7% because from this 2.19-20 status, then we went down, and 21-22, we sort of slowly came back almost to the level which we were 2 years ago. Just a wee bit below that level. And then the good news is that during 2022-23, the current financial year ending on 31st of March this year, the growth is expected to be 7%. Next year, the budget pegs the growth as about 6 to 6.8%. So 6.8% is slightly ambitious looking at how things are, but then we should be happy anyway with anything more than 6% because generally across the world, the growth rates of all the developed and developing economies, a majority of them have slowed down, including China. The World Bank calls the Indian economy as one of the beacons of hope for the future, because we are looking at a 6+ growth rate hopefully in the coming financial year. Now, if you compare that with China, which has been hit pretty badly due to the zero COVID policies and lockdowns, the growth rate expected during the current year, that is 2023, is just 4.3%. While all this is good news, for example, being the fifth largest economy in the world and then a very good growth rate and all that, let us do a quick reality check by looking at what is called the per capita GDP, wherein we are looking at the GDP of the country divided by the population. Now, if you look at the ranking of countries as per capita GDP, then USA is not number 1. USA is number 13. So you look at some of the smaller countries with smaller population and smaller size, they would be in the top 10. For example, right now the number 1 country in the world in terms of per capita GDP is Qatar. So countries which are bigger will then naturally tend to fall down, and then countries which are bigger with a bigger population would then take a backseat because the wealth of the country needs to be distributed among this big population. China is number 78, and where is India? We are 122nd in the ranking. Now, we need to do a lot more with our economy because we need to create a good future for the entire expanse of the population. That is the hope with which we go into each budget every year. Now, let me show you one more graph which you would find interesting. This one was discussed very extensively among economic circles last year. We talk about the big Indian middle class. Now, where is the middle class? We are talking about the income distribution in the country, where if you look at people having an income of just 14,900 rupees per month, then they are in the top 20% of the economy, because 80% of the population are earning less than 15,000 per month. Now, if you look at somebody who earns, say, 25,000 per month, then that person is in the top 10% of the society. And somebody who earns 1 lakh is in the top 3% of the population. So that is the state of the income distribution in the country today, which means that a lot of work needs to be done to reach out to the weaker sections of the society, and we need to support them because their daily earning is not enough to even earn their daily bread, let alone have a decent dwelling and other basic needs for a daily good living. So this is the background with which we should look at the budget, because when we look at every budget, we look at that in hope. So obviously the budget and the government policies at large have to reach out to the weaker sections and the lower income strata of the society to provide them with basic needs at least. If you look at any budget, be it your personal budget or say a family budget, we have two sides of the coin, income and expenditure. The same goes for companies also, isn't it? Wherein they have a profit and loss account showing their income, their revenue through the business, and on the other side their expenses, and hopefully at the end of the entire process, at the end of the year, they would have a profit which will keep their shareholders happy. Now, what about the government budget? The government budget again has two sides, the income and expenditure. But then when we talk about the budget, we do not talk about income. We talk about receipts and expenditure. Why? Because unlike an individual who earns money, and that is termed as an income, the government is not earning money through that kind of a work. The government is receiving money through various sources, taxes and other sources, and hopefully using it or spending it for the benefit of the people of India. So we are talking about receipts of the government on one side and then expenses of the government on the other hand. Now, do these two sides match? Not necessarily. If you look at the governments across the world, the budgets of various countries, you would find that the expenditure is more than the income because the government spends a lot of money on wealth creation. We'll talk about that separately. So the expenses tends to be more than the receipts of the government. So the difference between the expenditure and the receipts, the gap has to be filled through borrowings. Now, you would have heard about this term fiscal deficit. Now, what's fiscal deficit? Fiscal deficit is the extent of borrowings of the government of India or any government for that matter. So we'll talk about fiscal deficit in more detail as we go along. So keep this in mind. This is a question which is asked during interviews. Now, we discussed about two sides of the coin, receipts and expenditure. Let's do just one slide only on receipts and expenditure, where receipts are split between revenue receipts and capital receipts. What is the difference between the two? Revenue receipts are receipts which are recurring in nature. Capital receipts are those which are non-recurring in nature. Can you give me examples? Revenue receipt? Easy, isn't it? Taxes, various kinds of taxes. Capital receipt? Something which is non-recurring. For example, when the government sells 5G spectrum, for example, the money received through that, or disinvestment proceeds of the government, the money made through selling of shares of public sector undertakings. So those are examples. Now let us look at expenditure, where it is similarly split between revenue expenditure and capital expenditure. Again, what is revenue expenditure? Now you know it. It is something which is recurring in nature. Simple example, salaries paid to government employees, pensions. What about capital expenditure? Anything which is on asset building. For example, expenditure on making roads, rail network, airports, your metro system, water supply, sanitation facilities, housing schemes of the government. Anything which is on asset building is called capital expenditure. Now, when we're looking at your personal budget, what kind of expenditure would you like to have? You would of course like to have a mix of both, isn't it? For example, if you go out partying on a weekend and you go on a holiday, those are revenue expenditure because that is not asset building. But then that has to be done. At the same time, when you're buying a house, you're buying a car, then you're building up your assets, and that is capital expenditure. I hope you understand the difference. For example, when the government buys a car for an official, then that is capital expenditure. Paying the salary of the driver or putting in petrol in the car is revenue expenditure. So you should have a good mix of both, wherein you should be creating wealth for the country. As an individual, you would like to actually create assets for yourself, isn't it? So you'll keep a portion of your budget for that. Similarly, for any nation, asset building is a very, very important criteria. Now, the gap between revenue expenditure and revenue receipts is called revenue deficit. So that is another definition for you. So you now know what is fiscal deficit and what is a revenue deficit. Now let us see from where does the government get the money from. Now the major source of income, as you can see from the chart itself, are taxes, various kinds of taxes. Individuals pay income tax. Then we are talking about corporation tax. What is corporation tax? Those are taxes paid by corporates, companies. It's called corporation tax. Now, what is union excise duty? That is basically levied on petroleum products. Then we have GST, which again is 17% of the pie, and then customs duty, which is the duty levied on imports into India. So if we add up all those, income tax 15, then excise duty 7%, corporation tax 15%, GST 17%, and customs duty 4%, then we are looking at a whopping 58% of the receipts of the government. So friends, there is no getting away from taxes. So there's always a question, why can't the government reduce the taxes and all that? Because government needs the money, hopefully for nation building. Now, apart from taxes, we are talking about a couple of items here. Non-debt capital receipts. Non-debt means that this need not be paid back. Capital receipts. So it is the money received through selling capital assets. So that is essentially disinvestment proceeds of the government of India. Non-tax receipts, that is 6% of the total pie. Examples of that would be the dividends from various public sector undertakings, even the toll paid on national highways, any kind of fees which is collected by the government of India, let us say entry tickets for national museums, for example, fees for various national exams and all that. So everything comes into non-tax receipts, which is 6%. But then that still leaves a gap, as I said before, which needs to be plugged through borrowings. How much is borrowings? 34% of the total receipts of the government. So now we understand that is significantly high, and that is why borrowings or fiscal deficit is something which is a big worry for any government. Now, what is the extent of the fiscal deficit of the government of India? That is 16.6 lakh crores for the financial year ending on 31st of March 2023. That is for the financial year 2022-23. Now, there is what is called a Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, which has been enacted by the Parliament years ago, as per which the fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP should ideally hit a maximum ceiling of 3%. That is, the finance ministers year after year should strive to keep it around 3%. But then in budget after budget, we find that this is being breached. Usually the finance ministers give some kind of excuses for extra expenditure which is happening, and then they try to keep it somewhere around 4% or 4.5%. Now let's look at the trend in fiscal deficit over the last few years by looking at this particular chart, wherein, as I said, the general tendency has been to try and keep it somewhere around 4%, but then all was lost during the COVID impact year, wherein the fiscal deficit jumped to 9.2% because a lot of money was spent on food subsidy, reaching food to the hungry and the needy, trying to mitigate their hunger during the tough times. Also, a lot more projects were announced wherein the government was struggling to try and generate employment because a sizable portion of the masses were really struggling. So a lot of money went into those kind of schemes also, and the impact continued the next year also, where you can find that during 21-22, the final figures for fiscal deficit is 6.9%. That is the revised estimate, wherein for the year which is currently ending on 31st of March 2023, the fiscal deficit has been contained a bit more down to 6.4%. Now, what does the budget say for the next year? That is for the financial year 24. What do I mean by financial year 24? That is the financial year 2023-24. Always the financial year is denoted by the last year figure here, which means that when you say 2024-25, we are referring to financial year 25. So financial year 24, the ratio, that is fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP, the target is 5.9%. So the good news is that the ratio is tapering down from 9.2% progressively over the last couple of years and for the next year also. So that is a good thing, particularly keeping in mind what is happening in a couple of our neighboring countries. For example, you know the situation in Pakistan and Sri Lanka. So compared to that, our economy seems to be on a good footing, touch wood. Another major figure that you should keep in mind is the extent of foreign exchange reserves that we have, which is currently to the tune of 575 billion US dollars. Now, put that in perspective with the current figure, the figure which has come out yesterday regarding Pakistan, where the foreign exchange reserves is below $4 billion. What does that mean? Pakistan can service imports. Why imports? Because we need to pay in foreign exchange when we import goods into the country. For example, we need to import petroleum. Okay. Most of these countries need to do that if you're not oil rich. So, for example, if you look at Pakistan, they can import using those less than $4 billion of foreign exchange only for the next less than 3 weeks. So it looks like our economy is on a strong wicket, touch wood. So keeping that in mind, let us go into the expenditure side of the government. Let us see what the government spends on. Now, we know that there is a lot of borrowings by the government. Now, on the borrowings, the government has to pay interest. So borrowings is 34% of the pie. Now, what about the interest payment here? That is a whopping 20%. From where does the government borrow? The government borrows from the financial markets. They use various methods, like for example, sovereign green bonds. So they issue various kinds of bonds. Then they also garner money from the public through what? Through small saving schemes, like your post office saving schemes, your NSC, National Saving Scheme, and all that. So the money is also garnered from the public. And then the government pays an interest. The interest component, the interest payout is 20%. Let's now move on to other expense items. There's a mention here about centrally sponsored scheme and central sector schemes. What is the difference between the two? Centrally sponsored schemes are those which are sponsored by the central government and implemented through the state governments. The financing of these projects is shared between the center and the state. It can be 50-50, for example. It can be 60-40, 75-25. It can even be 90% by the central government and 10% by the state government. Particularly, it happens for projects in the Northeast. Examples of centrally sponsored schemes are Prime Minister Gram Sadak Yojana, which is for building good roads in villages. Another example would be the Prime Minister Awas Yojana, which is for manufacturing dwellings for the poor. We have another example, which is the Mantri project, which is the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Generation Program. Now, central sector schemes are those which are implemented, managed, and funded solely by the central government. Example would be the metro rail projects across various cities in India, or rolling out optical fiber cables reaching out even to the villages of India through the BharatNet program. In addition to that, the Finance Commission also gives out grants to local bodies across the states in India. Those are the Panchayati Raj institutions. So they receive support from the Finance Commission that will be to the extent of 9%, which also includes grants which are given during the time of natural disasters and calamities. The grants which are given to the states in the case of floods happening in a particular state, for example. So that is the support coming through the Finance Commission. Now, the current Finance Commission, which is the 15th Finance Commission, which will be there for a 5-year period ending in 2026, they look at the allocation of grants and support, financial support to the states. So the sharing of taxes, for example, between the center and the states is also governed by the Finance Commission. Why sharing of taxes? Because a lot of taxes go directly to the central government. For example, income tax. Whether you are based in Tamil Nadu or Punjab or any other state in India, the tax goes directly into the kitty of the central government. Similarly, the tax paid by companies, the corporation tax, that is also going directly to the central government irrespective of where the company is located. So the central government collects a large amount of taxes also through central GST, through customs duty, then again the excise duty on petroleum products and all that, and the center then shares a portion of that with the state governments. According to the norms of the current Financial Commission, 41% of the taxes collected by the central government is shared with the state governments. Now the allocation for each state is then decided by the Finance Commission. So the state's share of taxes also forms part of the expenditure of the government. Subsidies garner 7% of the expenditure pie. There are three kinds of subsidies, out of which the two major ones are food subsidy and the fertilizer subsidy. The third one, which now has come down in size, is the petroleum subsidy. So the three subsidies together contribute to 7% and in money terms 3.75 lakh crores. Now these do not generate returns, isn't it? These are doled out to people, but then these are very important. For example, the public distribution system, the free ration schemes, the subsidized ration scheme of the government is extremely important for the needy, and that is why we have the food subsidy scheme. Then the fertilizer subsidy, extremely important for the farmers, particularly over the last couple of years post-COVID. The fertilizer prices across the globe has gone up, and more so after the Ukraine war. So the farmers need subsidy. Now, that is a concern here because the subsidy allocation of 3.75 lakh crores is down 28% from last year. So we need to really wait and see whether this will be enough, particularly the fertilizer subsidy. The food subsidy also has been cut as compared to the last 3 years. So the government is trying to reduce those kind of expenditure. But again, these are necessary expenditure. So let us see whether the government is able to keep the spending within the specified limit. Obviously, defense is a major spending because we need to be alert with our neighbors. So 8% is the allocation for defense, which is to the tune of 5.94 lakh crores. Then we have an allocation of 4% towards pension, and then 8% goes to other expenditure which has not been listed here. So that completes the entire expenditure pie. Now let us look at the major budget provisions. The big ticket announcement for me is the investment in infrastructure, wherein the capital investment, remember we use the word asset building for the country. So that is to the tune of 10 lakh crores, which is up 33% from the budget of last year. And this capital outlay constitutes 3.3% of our GDP. Along with that, the grants which are given by the central government to the various states and used for asset creation for capital building at the state level, if you add that also, then the total expenditure on capital investment then goes up to 13.7 lakh crores. It goes up from 10 lakhs to 13.7 lakh crores. So that also included, it will be 4.5% of the GDP. In addition to this, the central government also gives a interest-free loan for 50 years to the state governments. That is given to the state governments only for capital asset generation. So only for capital intensive projects. This was introduced in the budget last year. It is going to continue in the current budget also for the financial year 2023-24. So that is also a good thing. The point to be noted is that capital investment, apart from being an asset creator, an asset builder for the nation, has additional benefits in terms of being a big time job provider in terms of employment while new roads are being built, while new airports are being built, in railways and waterways and in other creations, for example, sanitation, water supply schemes and all that. And then it brings in money in the hands of those workers. And that money then will be spent by them, which will then drive demand in the economy. So then more goods will be produced. So there is a trickle down effect in the economy where more money comes into the hands of the people and all that. So that is why always capital investment is something which is looked upon as a very good thing. Now, included in this capital investment is investment to the tune of 2.4 lakh crores specifically allocated for railways. Now, if you look at other projects across the spectrum of building up ports, coal, steel, fertilizer, and food grain sectors, the government has identified 100 critical projects and proposed funding of 75,000 crores for these 100 projects. There's also the announcement about airways, wherein 50 additional airports, helipads, waterdromes, and other advanced landing grounds are to be revived. So we're looking at investment across various modes of transport. And then we are looking at urban development through an urban infrastructure development fund, which is specifically for tier 2 and tier 3 cities to the tune of 10,000 crores. Another major outlay is for the PM Awas Yojana, which is for construction of small dwellings for the poor of India. And the allocation has grown by a whopping 66%, which is good. And it is right now 79,000 crores, wherein the earlier target was to provide a dwelling to every citizen of India by 2022, but then that got extended. Now the government is talking about 2025. Anyways, targets are there. Hopefully it is met, because those are basic needs. Remember, we talked about the basic needs of the poor, so hopefully things would be implemented. Now, moving on to agriculture, which is one of the pillars of the economy, the budget provides for agriculture credit, that is the credit available to farmers through various banks, that is available to the tune of 20 lakh crores. The United Nations has announced 2023 as the year of millets. Now, India is the largest producer of millets and the second largest exporter. So the finance minister then referred to a scheme called Shri Anna scheme, which is mainly to focus on millets. There is a millet research institute in Hyderabad, so fund that and raise that to a level of international excellence and further the production of millets in the country and exports. There is also a scheme to provide support for fishermen to the tune of 6,000 crores, which is a PM Matsya Sampada Yojana. Coming to the health sector, there is a severe shortage of nurses in the country as per the WHO norms, that is the number of nurses per 100 people of the population, that needs to be corrected urgently. So the government has decided to set up 157 nursing institutions, nursing colleges in tandem, which are allied with 157 medical colleges which came into vogue after 2014. The government has announced the setting up of a national digital library which will be set up with books across geographies, across genres, across languages for children and adolescents. This is a good thing because this will improve the reading habit of children, which is so essential for many competitive exams, isn't it? Where reading comprehension is a very integral part. So this is a good thing. Along with that, physical libraries will also be set up in panchayats. So hopefully this comes through. Then there is a particular scheme which is reaching out to the tribals, that is the Pradhan Mantri PVT development mission, where PVT talks about particularly vulnerable tribal groups. So providing basic needs of the population through safe housing, clean drinking water, sanitation, education, health and nutrition, road and telecom, and the budget is provided for 15,000 crores. Need to mention one more scheme which is available since the mid-90s for furthering education of the tribal people. That is, from the mid-90s, the government over the years, various governments have set up Ekalavya schools, model residential schools for them. So this budget provides for hiring more teachers and support staffs. This is something which is again empowering the tribal youth. Now this one is for the attention of students who are preparing for B school interviews. There are a couple of announcements for the MSME sector, which is so essential for the economy. Now MSMEs, as we know, they suffered very badly during the COVID times and even post-COVID times. And during that period, they could not execute a lot of projects which they had actually signed up with government bodies, government institutions, and public sector undertakings. Now, when those kind of projects are signed up, then these MSMEs have to provide for what is called performance security. That is, they need to put up some money upfront as security before the project is signed, so that in case of any default, then the MSMEs are liable to forfeit that particular deposit. Now, what happened during COVID times is that many of them could not execute the projects, so they lost that kind of money. Now the government has announced the scheme which is called Vivad Se Vishwas scheme, wherein they said that 95% of such security deposit will be returned to the MSME. So they get their money back, which is a good thing. This will be used by them for furthering their growth, okay, for further projects and all that. So that is a kind of support which is useful for them. Now, the MSMEs implement their projects by taking credit from banks. They need that kind of financial support from banks. So in this budget, an additional 9,000 crores have been provided to the banking institutions as credit guarantee. What does that mean? That is a support to the financial institutions in times of default, so that the financial institutions, using that 9,000 crores as a kind of security from the government, will then give out extra credit to the MSMEs. So what is the extent of credit that the government expects through this additional 9,000 crores of allocation? To the extent of 2 lakh crores. So additional banking credit to the extent of 2 lakh crores is made available to the MSMEs. We are talking about e-implementation in the courts across India. The budget provides for 7,500 crores. Now, why I mentioned this is, look at it. This is phase 3 of e-implementation in the courts, and still the courts are lagging so far behind in timely disposal of cases, isn't it? With all this e-implementation and all that, how we all wish that the courts are much more speedier in disposing cases, hopefully. One of the words which were repeatedly heard during the budget speech was green. So the government is talking about green initiatives where the allocation is 35,000 crores, wherein the transition is set for moving from polluting energy sources, for example, coal, to non-polluting energy sources, and then cutting down on green gas emissions and all that. Basically in tune with the climate summit suggestions, also the discussions and outcome of the G20 summit. Also, this was also covered during the G20 summit. So there is a long road ahead, and the government is also allocating 19,700 crores for the production of green hydrogen. So green hydrogen mission that will again reduce the dependence on fossil fuel imports, and the government has a target for a significant production of green hydrogen. So that's a good initiative. Now I'd like to take up a point in the budget which I'm sure you as students in college wished had happened, because we want the courses in college, whatever courses we choose to study, to be aligned with the needs of the industry and to drive employment. And ideally, we want to also have the facility while studying to generate income by doing some small projects and internships and all that. Now, here is a initiative in the budget which I would like to read in full, because it's something that I'm sure you as a student in college wish for. Here we are talking about a different thing, not about college students, where we are talking about Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana, skilling the youth kind of project within the next 3 years. Let's just read, which is interesting. On-job training, industry partnership, and alignment of courses with needs of the industry will be emphasized. The scheme will also cover new age courses like coding, artificial intelligence, robotics, mechatronics, Internet of Things, 3D printing, drones, and soft skills. To skill youth for international opportunities, 30 Skill India international centers will be set up across different states. Then there is a National Apprenticeship Promotion Scheme which has been announced to support 47 lakh youth over the period of next 3 years by providing them stipend. How we wish this is implemented in colleges across the country, isn't it? Whatever courses we choose to adopt. Moving on to some announcements in saving schemes. There is a scheme which has been announced for women and girls, which is an investment scheme for 2 years, wherein women and children can deposit up to a maximum of 2 lakhs in this scheme, which is called the Mahila Samman Bachat Patra, and the interest rate is 7.5%. A couple of announcements for senior citizens, which is very good because many a time senior citizens are left to fend for themselves. Quite a few of them are past their productive age in the sense that they have stopped working. The rest of their life, they are left to fend for themselves from the savings that they have. So a couple of investment schemes for them. The deposit limit for the senior citizen savings schemes have been enhanced to 30 lakhs, which is good. And then the deposit scheme for senior citizens for monthly income scheme in post offices, the limit has been enhanced to 9 lakhs. And if it's a joint account, that is for 2 or more people jointly having an account on MIS, then the limit has been enhanced to 15 lakhs. Another highlight of the budget was the announcement on income tax, where the focus is on the new tax regime, which was announced in 2020. Now, currently there are 2 tax regimes in vogue. The old tax regime, which still a lot more people favor, because under the new tax regime, there are very few incentives in the sense that the old tax regime, we have a standard deduction, then there is a deduction of up to 1.5 lakhs for investments in specific government schemes. There is a deduction for medical insurance, there is a deduction for housing loan and all that. In the new tax regime, none of that is available. So not many people opted for the new tax regime. So to goad or push people to take up the new tax regime, which the finance minister said is going to be default in the future. So we may see the phasing out of the old tax regime as we go along in future. Now in the new tax regime, there is no tax up to 7 lakhs of income. The number of tax slabs in the new regime has been reduced to 5, and let us see how it applies. For example, if somebody has a total income of 6 lakhs per annum, then he does not pay a tax because he's below the limit of 7 lakhs. Suppose if another person has got a total income of 8 lakhs in a year, then for the first 3 lakhs, he does not pay any tax. Then for the next 3 lakhs of his income, he will pay 5% tax, 5% of 3 lakhs, which is 15,000 rupees. Now for the next 2 lakhs, mind you, we said his total income is 8 lakhs. So for the next 2 lakhs, it attracts 10% tax, which means 20,000. So his total tax liability would be then 35,000. A surprising announcement of the budget was that the income tax surcharge for very wealthy people who earn more than 5 crores was reduced from 37% surcharge to 25% surcharge. So under the new regime, the finance minister has introduced a 25% surcharge for people with more than 2 crores of income. Why the reduction in surcharge for the super rich has come as a surprise is because before the budget, there was speculation that the finance minister might introduce a wealth tax to tax the very wealthy people and then use that money to fund programs for feeding the poor and the needy. But instead of that, the opposite has happened. So let us hope that this will spur the very wealthy people to come clean on their incomes and hopefully pay their due taxes. The last slide is on the allocation for various ministries. Now, why I'm saying this is not for you to mug up the numbers. Don't do that. But look at the ministries in priority of allocation. Obviously, thanks to our couple of friendly neighbors, the allocation for defense is very high at 5.94 lakh crores. And then for capital investment in road transport, in railways, we are talking about chemicals and fertilizers. Then definitely we need to have a public distribution system very effectively in place. So we have an allocation of more than 2 lakh crores for that. Rural development initiatives, very important. For farmers, agriculture sector, very important. And then to roll out high-tech communication systems in the country also. So these are priority areas of allocation for the government, and you would understand why. So I hope that the discussion gave you a good overview of the economy, also the priorities of the government, why certain schemes were introduced, some of the hopes which did not come through. And overall, I hope you have enough points for your group discussions and interviews and for examinations. Best wishes.